Satnam, Satnam, what's going on, everybody? Happy May. All right, here we are, right in the middle of eclipse season. I don't know about you, but my personal experience and the experience of a lot of people I've been talking to is that this has been a very, very, very fiery, intense, a lot of intense feelings, intense communications, intense relations of sorts. Now, the good thing is for May, I'll share my screen in a second here, is that I do think this upcoming eclipse on May 5th that we're going to be focusing on for today's video is a lot nicer than the last one. But again, this whole eclipse season, I'll just share my screen. We can kind of take a look at where things stand. There's just so much energy that's concentrated up here in the constellation of Aries and in the constellation of Libra. And, Libra is the natural house of relationships, it's the natural seventh house in the zodiac. And Aries is the natural first house, which is the house of the self, both the soul and the ego. And in particular, with the sun being in there in one of its strongest positions, I think this is contributing to a lot of the intensity of things and a lot of personality, honestly, coming up. People rubbing and frictions and uh, escalating of tensions. But what makes this particularly also, I think, spicy is that Mercury is in the mix there. So a lot around communication, and it's retrograde. So it's a little bit more unpredictable, a little bit more volatile. And furthermore, Mercury and Mars are in each other's signs. So Mercury is in Aries, ruled by Mars. Mars is in Gemini, ruled by Mercury. So this expression, because Mercury is the throat chakra, it's communication, and Mars is kind of third chakra, pride a lot of the times, willpower, drive. Those are, in my opinion, contributing to a lot of these exchanges that are happening. Saturn was very involved and is still involved with everything happening in Aries, but thankfully, Saturn isn't going to be influencing the moon for this eclipse, which, since it's a lunar eclipse, is important. So I'll just talk about this eclipse briefly, and then I'll give some remedial measures that you can consider over the coming days in case you'd like to tune in with some of these planetary energetics. But in my opinion, I think this eclipse is much sweeter than the last. And the reason in particular is that Jupiter is now much more involved in its relationship with the moon. And not just the moon, but also with Ketu, which is the south node of the moon. It's what's causing this particular lunar eclipse, one of the things. And K2 is very spiritual in nature. It's a malefic energy because it tends to cause constriction, rigidity. Um, it's a subtle fire energy. It's like a subtle Mars, but it's the prime energy of moksha and of liberation. It's the Pingala Nadi in the Sushumna. And so I like this eclipse because Jupiter's involvement onto Ketu really spiritualizes it. It brings in all of the wonderful energies of Jupiter, which is Dharma, grace, the Guru, abundance. And this time it's a full moon. The moon is at its fullness in Libra, which is a beautiful sign ruled by Venus. It's the heart center, it's love, it's harmony. And we have a nice full moon in Libra that's getting a wonderful influence of Jupiter, no negative influence of Saturn, and it's not having the effects of Rahu as directly as in the last eclipse. So to me, this is a much more spiritualized lunar eclipse. It's more sattvic in nature. However, it still is a lunar eclipse with a lot of energy that's influencing it. So it's no free ride, but to me, I think the big volatility of that first, wave kind of hit, and now we're sort of on the back end of it. There's no negative influence of Mars, in any way onto this eclipse, so other than the fact that it's in Aries. Well, a lot of energy is in Aries, but again, the lunar eclipse is in Libra. Um, the other things that are a little bit different is that for this lunar eclipse, the moon is in a really good, what we will call nakshatra. Nakshatra. Nakshatra is one of the constellations of one of the 27 constellations that the moon passes through in its 27-day orbit. It's in the constellation of Vishaka, which is ruled by Jupiter, and Jupiter is involving itself in this eclipse. So that's good because we're kind of under this subtle Jupiter umbrella of Vishaka, and Vishaka is it's symbolized by a triumphal arch. So it's really good for goal setting, to be honest. It has a lot of manifesting capabilities. And also, what's good for this eclipse is that the sun is in a constellation known as Barani, which is ruled by the planet Venus. So Venus is a benefic planet, Jupiter is a benefic planet. We have the sun and the moon in these benefic nakshatras, which is a very good thing, very different than the last eclipse when they were in some more difficult constellations. And Barony is symbolized by the vulva, the female sex organ, the vagina. So again, there's just these energies around kind of femininity and feeling, which kind of softens things up to a large degree. The last ones were fiery and they were airy and they were intense. So that's kind of the summary that I would just like to lay here. And again, with this being a lunar eclipse with K2's involvement, in my opinion, it is a prime time for feeling, and also being aware of the feeling and not being as attached to it, because K2 is not as attached to things, whereas Rahu really likes to grip and to cling. And I think that came up for a lot of people in this last eclipse. But just to watch the emotions, to be, the witness, to be in more that kind of transcendent state of consciousness and the soul. And again, I think it's positive. And I think, eclipses aren't just for the day of, it's in the period leading up to the eclipses and even on the back end. So, we're in a good place, I think, moving forward with this Jupiter transit, coming into things to soften things up a lot. But still, there's a lot of energy, happening in this domain that'll go on for a lot of this month. The sun will move out on the 15th. Mercury will go out of retrograde on the 15th also. So that's a nice change on the 15th as the sun will move out of Aries into Taurus, and Mercury will no longer be retrograde after the 15th. Venus will move into Gemini on the 2nd. So it's happening tomorrow and it will be in there for the month. Mars will move out of Gemini into Cancer on the 11th. So, there'll be some big movements that'll happen on the 11th and the 15th in particular that I think will soften things up. Fiery planets going out of fiery and airy signs, Sun going into an earth sign ruled by Venus, Mars moving out of an air sign into a water sign, where it will start to actually become what they call debilitated, where Mars will actually become more weakened in its energy. And that'll have some effects, but nothing super pressing for the moment. And yeah, this lunar eclipse, we won't see it in the northern hemisphere, but it will be peaking at about 9:20 in the morning on Friday the 5th, just as an FYI. So that evening of the 4th with the full moon will kind of be the closest viewing that we'll have to it in the northern hemisphere. And so for this month, what I would personally suggest, at least for me, the energies that I'm working with the energies of K2, because K2 is the node of the moon that will be eclipsing the moon. I'll be working with the energy of the moon because the moon is being eclipsed. And I'm working with the energies of Jupiter because I really like this combination of those three planets together. They have a lot of very positive, spiritual, dharmic potentials. These other planets obviously have an effect, but to me, just the energetic focus that I feel like is available and most beneficial to be working with are those of Jupiter, the moon, and K2. So I'm including some information on remedial measures if you would like to check those out for chanting mantra, which is a great thing to do during an eclipse, um, using the color scheme of those planets, maybe even some aromas, some incense, some essential oils, um, even some, deities, if that really calls you. I like the mantras the most for eclipses because they're so subtle in nature, especially for K2. Really, mantra is the most effective for the lunar nodes of K2 and Rahu. So the mantra for K2 is Om Kame Ketave Namaha. Om Kame Ketave Namaha. For the moon, it's Om Som Somaye Namaha. Om Som Somaye Namaha. And for Jupiter, it's Om Gum Gurave Namaha. Om Gum Gurave Namaha. Wishing you a sweeter eclipse than the last one. Again, I personally, just at my personal, life level, I had two of the most heated exchanges that I've had probably in the last year, and they came in very quick succession of one another, and they were both prompted by kind of strange, unexpected, unusual circumstances, which is a lot of what eclipses bring. And I handled it as well as I could, kind of for as long as I could. I snapped, and I'm not alone in this. Of people that I know, that have been dealing with things and kind of holding on, and then they just sort of popped off. And so again, and I felt a lot of relief even in these last few days, since the eclipse, things have actually brought a lot of relief to those situations. So just kind of interesting that they started to escalate before the eclipse. One of them actually peaked on the day of the eclipse, and then one of them sort of hit about a week after that, and now they've sort of both subsided, relatively speaking. But yeah, unusual, extraordinary things are kind of standard while these energies are destabilized during the eclipse period. But it also too gives everybody a chance to see where we still are triggered, where our reactions are, those things that still hold power over our mind and over our emotions, which is what a lot of what this eclipse has to do with regarding our own sense of identity and our relationship with others. So as always, we can't control these things. I mean, we can be in relationship with them, and to me that's really just having the awareness of it and the flow of life, and it's always serving all of us exactly as it's supposed to, and we're all just here living out the karma that we came to live out for this particular lifetime, in this particular human vehicle with this particular mind. And the fact of the matter is, we're all really in it together. We're all humans having this human experience. We all have all of the emotions and the spectrum of the human condition. And so, again, we just be in reverence to it. Om Namah Shivaya, thy will, not mine, be done. Um, take it as it comes, as they say when we're talking about K2. Just take it as it comes, just really letting go and relinquishing, attachment to outcome. Easier said than done, obviously, when something very personal arises. But hey, we do the best we can, and always we remember that all of this is about love, as much as possible for ourselves and for others and for life in general. So, Godspeed on this eclipse. Enjoy the remedial measures, and look forward to seeing you again next time. Satnam.